There is something most people never expect when you stop chasing someone, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop trying to fix how they treat you. Something strange happens. At first, nothing changes. He still acts the same, still replies late, still seems calm, still looks like he is unaffected. But underneath that silence, something is shifting. And this is where most people misunderstand everything. Because real change in a man does not show up as words. It shows up in silence. There is a moment every man notices, even if he never admits it. The moment he realizes, you are not chasing me anymore. Not angry, not begging, not asking questions. Just gone from that emotional pull. And at first he tells himself it doesn't matter. He tells himself, she will come back. She always comes back. She is just upset. But time passes, and something feels different. Because the space you used to fill is now quiet. Too quiet. And here is the part nobody talks about clearly. A man doesn't always value a woman in the moment she is there. Not because she is not valuable, but because presence creates comfort, and comfort makes people forget to appreciate. But absence interrupts comfort. It forces the mind to notice what the heart ignored. So when you stop calling, when you stop checking in, when you stop reacting to everything he does, he feels it. Not immediately in an emotional way, but in a mental way first. He notices you are not as available as before. And this is where curiosity begins. Not love yet, not regret yet, just curiosity. He starts checking his phone more than usual, not because he misses you deeply yet, but because he is used to hearing from you. And now there is silence where your energy used to be, and silence is uncomfortable when someone is used to attention. Then something else happens. He starts remembering small things, not the big arguments, not the dramatic moments, the small things, your messages, your presence, the way you responded quickly, the way you cared, even when he didn't fully show effort. And he doesn't call it missing you yet. He just calls it thinking. But it is already deeper than he admits. Because here is the truth most people don't realize. A man understands your value more clearly in your absence than in your presence. Not because you became better or worse, but because distance removes distraction, and now he can finally see what he ignored. And you are not doing anything loud. You are not posting for attention. You are not trying to prove a point. You are simply no longer emotionally reachable the way you used to be. And that changes the entire dynamic. Because when a woman lets go peacefully, not with drama, not with revenge, but with quiet distance, it creates something inside a man that words cannot explain easily. It creates mental replay. He starts asking himself questions he never asked before. Why did she stop? Did I push her too far? Was she more important than I acted like? And even if he doesn't say it out loud, his mind starts working on it. But here is something important to understand. At this stage, he does not come back yet. He does not suddenly confess feelings. He does not suddenly become perfect. No, he is still in ego, still pretending he is fine, still acting like he has control. But internally, something has shifted. The certainty he had about you staying is no longer solid. And that is where everything begins. Because love in many men does not start with pursuit. It starts with loss. But the fear of loss. And you have just introduced that fear without saying a single word. So if you are watching this and wondering, does he even notice I'm gone? Yes, he notices. Even if he acts like he doesn't. Even if he stays silent. Even if he continues his normal life. Something in him has already registered the change. And this is only the beginning. Because once a man feels that shift, the next stage is where confusion begins. And confusion is where emotional attachment starts to grow. Now something interesting starts to happen. The silence has lasted longer than he expected. At first, he thought it was temporary. A few hours, a few days, maybe a week. But now enough time has passed for him to realize something important. You are not coming back the way you used to. And that realization creates a quiet battle inside him. Not between him and you, but between his ego and his heart. His ego tells him, don't reach out. If she wanted to talk, she would. Stay cool. Act like it doesn't bother you. The ego always wants to protect pride. It wants control. It wants to avoid looking vulnerable. So on the outside, he may appear completely unaffected. He may still post online, still laugh with friends, still carry on with his routine. To anyone watching, he looks exactly the same. But the heart is having a different conversation, because the heart doesn't care about pride. The heart cares about connection. And slowly, the heart starts asking questions. Questions he was able to avoid when you were always there. Questions like, what if she really moved on? What if she's done this time? What if I took her for granted? And suddenly the confidence he once had begins to weaken. This is something many women never see because it happens privately. Most men don't announce when they're thinking about someone. They don't call a meeting with their friends and say, I'm struggling. Instead, they carry those thoughts quietly, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. And that's why people often assume nothing is happening. But a lot is happening. It's just happening internally. The strange thing about human nature is that certainty feels comfortable. When someone is always available, the mind relaxes. It assumes the connection will always be there. But uncertainty creates a tension. Now he doesn't know where he stands. And because he doesn't know, he starts thinking more. Maybe he sees something that reminds him of you. A song, a restaurant, a place he both visited, a phrase you used often. Suddenly, memories appear without warning, not because he is trying to think about you, because the brain naturally connects emotions to experiences, and now those experiences keep pulling your memory back into his mind. The funny part is that he may try to resist it. He may tell himself, it's not a big deal. I'll get over it. I'm fine. But the more he repeats those words, the more he notices that he keeps thinking about you anyway, and that frustrates him, because people like feeling in control of their emotions. Yet emotions don't always follow instructions. This is where he begins comparing. Not intentionally, it just happens. Maybe he talks to someone new. Maybe he meets other people. Maybe he tries to distract himself. But comparison starts quietly, and comparison is powerful. Because now he has something to measure against. He remembers how easy conversations felt with you. He remembers how understood he felt. He remembers little details he barely appreciated at the time. And this creates another problem. The more he remembers the good things, the harder it becomes to convince himself that losing you doesn't matter. Notice something important. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about making someone suffer. It's about reality. When someone valuable leaves your daily life, you notice the difference. That is true for friendships. That is true for family. And that is true for romantic relationships. Many people think letting go means giving up. But often letting go is the first time someone experiences your absence clearly enough to understand your value. Because while you were there, your presence felt normal. Now it feels rare. And rare things get attention. At some point, he may start checking. Maybe he looks at your profile. Maybe he asks mutual friends about you. Maybe he wonders what you're doing. Maybe he notices you're no longer reacting to everything he posts. The details vary, but curiosity grows, and curiosity is dangerous for the ego. Because the more curious he becomes, the more emotionally invested he becomes. Someone who truly doesn't care doesn't wonder. They don't check, they don't replay conversations, they don't revisit memories. They simply move on. The fact that his mind keeps returning to you means something inside him is still attached. Now another shift begins. He starts remembering your kindness more than your mistakes. This is important, because when people are frustrated or distracted, they often focus on flaws. But distance changes perspective. Over time, the emotional weight of arguments fades. What remains are the moments that felt meaningful, the laughs, the support, the comfort, the connection. And suddenly he finds himself missing things he never thought twice about. Your voice, your attention, your encouragement, the way you cared, the way you remembered small details, the way you showed up consistently. Things that once seemed ordinary now feel special. That's when the heart gets louder. Much louder. The ego still says, stay silent. But the heart says, you miss her. The ego says, don't admit it. The heart says, you've been thinking about her every day. The ego says, act strong. The heart says, you're hurting more than you expected. This internal conflict can last a long time, longer than most people realize, because admitting feelings requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is difficult for many men, especially if they spent a long time hiding emotions. Yet every day the silence continues, the emotional weight grows, because now he isn't just missing your presence. He's imagining a future without it, and that feels very different. When someone is temporarily gone, the mind stays calm, but when the possibility of losing them permanently appears, emotions become stronger. For the first time, he starts seeing that life moves on. You may be meeting new people, building new routines, creating new memories, living your life. And the thought that you are no longer waiting for him can hit harder than he expected. Because what often affects a man most isn't losing attention. It's realizing he lost access to someone who genuinely cared, someone who wasn't easy to replace, someone who brought something unique into his life, and now that uniqueness is gone. This is where many men begin feeling something they didn't expect: regret. Not full regret yet, but the beginning of it. Small moments, small realizations, small emotional flashes, enough to make him pause, enough to make him wonder, enough to make him ask himself, did I make a mistake? And once that question enters his mind, the next stage becomes unavoidable, because now he isn't just curious. Now he is starting to realize what he lost, and that's where the deepest emotions begin. In the next part, we are going to talk about the realization phase, when he starts missing the little things and replaying every memory. This is where curiosity turns into genuine emotional longing, and the connection begins feeling impossible to ignore. Now the situation changes again. The curiosity that once occupied his mind is no longer enough. The questions have become heavier. The silence has lasted longer. And something that started as simple wondering is beginning to turn into genuine realization. This is the stage many men never expect, because they believe they are prepared for distance. They believe they can simply move forward. They believe feelings can be switched off whenever necessary. But emotions rarely work that way. The heart often understands things much later than the mind. And now his heart is finally catching up. At first, he misses the obvious things. The conversations, the messages, the attention, the routine of having you around. But eventually something deeper happens. He starts missing the things he never consciously noticed before. The little things. And strangely enough, the little things hurt the most. He remembers how you laughed at certain jokes, how you reacted when you were excited, the way your voice changed when you talked about something important. The small habits that once seemed ordinary, the details that never felt important when they were available every day. Now those details feel precious because they're gone. People often think they miss someone because of grand romantic moments. Sometimes that's true, but more often they miss the everyday moments, the familiar moments, the moments that quietly became part of life. And that's exactly what starts happening to him. He may be driving somewhere, walking through a store, sitting alone at night, working, watching television, doing completely normal things. Then suddenly a memory appears. Not because he was looking for it, not because he wanted it. It simply shows up, and for a few seconds it feels real again. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a joke, maybe it's a random day that seemed insignificant at the time. But now it plays in his mind with surprising clarity, and he realizes something uncomfortable. The moments he thought were ordinary were actually meaningful. This is where emotional replay begins. And emotional replay is powerful, because memories rarely return exactly as they happened. The mind filters them, the heart adds feeling to them, and over time, certain moments become more valuable than they seemed in real life. Suddenly he finds himself revisiting old memories again and again. Not because he's trying to torture himself, because his mind is searching for something it misses, something it once had access to, something it didn't fully appreciate. And the more memories return, the harder it becomes to ignore the truth. You mattered, more than he admitted, more than he realized, maybe even more than he allowed himself to believe. This realization can be uncomfortable, because once a person recognizes value, they also recognize loss, and loss creates emotion. Strong emotion, the kind that doesn't disappear overnight. For a long time, he may have focused on what was missing from the relationship, what annoyed him, what frustrated him, what wasn't perfect. But distance changes perspective. Now he starts seeing what was present instead. The loyalty, the effort, the consistency, the care, the emotional safety. And that's when many men begin understanding something important. Finding flaws is easy. Finding genuine connection is rare. Very rare. There are many people in the world, many conversations, many opportunities, many distractions. But real connection? That is different. And once someone experiences it, replacing it isn't nearly as easy as they imagined. This realization often arrives quietly, not during dramatic moments, not during emotional speeches, not during major life events. Usually it arrives during ordinary moments, moments when nobody else is around, moments when he is alone with his thoughts, moments when honesty becomes unavoidable. And honesty can be difficult, because honesty forces him to admit things he once ignored. Maybe you cared more than anyone else. Maybe you were more patient than he realized. Maybe you gave more than he appreciated. Maybe he assumed you would always stay. That last realization often hits the hardest, because many people don't intentionally take someone for granted. They simply become accustomed to their presence. They stop imagining life without them. And when that person finally lets go, reality changes. Now another emotion enters the picture. Not panic, not yet. Something deeper. Longing. Longing feels different from curiosity. Curiosity asks questions. Longing feels absence. Curiosity wonders where someone is. Longing wishes they were here. Curiosity is mental. Longing is emotional. And now he is beginning to experience both. He may still say nothing. He may still appear calm. But internally the emotional connection is becoming stronger. Not weaker. Stronger. Because every memory reinforces the same truth. You are important. And once the heart accepts that truth, it becomes difficult to go backward. He cannot unknow what he now knows. He cannot suddenly stop feeling what he now feels. The realization has already happened. This is why letting go can be so powerful. Not because it forces someone to love you. Not because it guarantees they return. But because it removes distractions. It removes assumptions. It removes certainty. And sometimes for the first time, it allows someone to see clearly. For many men, clarity arrives late. Not because they are incapable of feeling, but because emotions often take longer to process, especially when pride, routine, and comfort are involved. Now he starts asking different questions. Not why did she leave, but what did she mean to me? Not will she come back, but what happens if she doesn't? And those questions carry much more emotional weight, because now the focus isn't on control, the focus is on value. He begins recognizing something he never expected, the peace you brought, the warmth you brought, the feeling of being understood, the feeling of being accepted, the feeling of having someone in his corner. Those things are difficult to measure, but they become impossible to ignore once they're gone. And this is where the turning point starts approaching, because realization naturally creates reflection, and reflection naturally creates regret. Not overwhelming regret yet, but enough to make him look backward, enough to make him wonder how things could have been different, enough to make him revisit choices he once felt confident about. For the first time, he is no longer focused on what he lost. He is focused on who he lost. And that changes everything. Because people can replace attention. People can replace distractions. People can replace routines. But replacing a unique person? That's much harder. The deeper he understands that truth, the stronger the emotional pull becomes. And soon, that pull will lead him into the next stage. The stage where regret becomes impossible to avoid. The stage where the heart grows louder than the ego. The stage where he begins confronting the possibility that he may have let something truly valuable slip away. In the next part, we shall talk about the turning point, when regret becomes real and he starts feeling the weight of losing you. This is where memories become emotional pain, comparisons intensify, and the realization of your value reaches its strongest point. Up until now, everything has been building slowly. The curiosity, the memories, the realization, the longing. None of it happened overnight. It happened piece by piece, thought by thought, memory by memory. And now he has arrived at a place he never expected to reach. The turning point. The moment when missing you is no longer something he can explain away. The moment when regret begins to feel real. This is where many men discover something uncomfortable. The things they thought they could replace aren't as replaceable as they imagined. The attention, the comfort, the connection, the emotional safety, the understanding, the familiarity, the feeling of being known, those things are not easily recreated. And that realization can hit harder than expected. For a long time, he may have assumed life would continue exactly as before, that if one chapter ended, another would immediately begin, that someone else would simply fill the space. But life doesn't always work that way, because certain people leave a unique imprint, and when they're gone, the absence feels specific, not generic, specific. Now he starts noticing that absence more often, in quiet moments, in ordinary moments, in moments that have nothing to do with relationships at all, and yet somehow they lead back to you. Maybe he accomplishes something important and instinctively thinks about telling you, then remembers he can't. Maybe something funny happens and he thinks about how you would have reacted, then realizes you're no longer part of his daily life. Maybe he has a difficult day and suddenly remembers how you used to encourage him, how you used to listen, how you used to care, and that memory stays with him longer than expected. These moments matter because they reveal something powerful. He isn't just missing a person, he's missing an experience, the experience of having you in his life. And once someone realizes that, the emotional impact becomes much deeper. Regret rarely arrives like a lightning strike. Most of the time it arrives like a slow wave, growing stronger each day, until eventually it becomes impossible to ignore. At first he regrets small things, things he said, things he didn't say, moments he could have handled better, conversations he ended too quickly, opportunities he failed to appreciate. Then the regret grows larger. He begins questioning bigger decisions, bigger choices, bigger mistakes. And that's when reflection becomes serious. Human beings naturally look back when they feel loss. They revisit the past searching for answers, searching for understanding, searching for the point where things changed. And that's exactly what he begins doing. He starts replaying events differently, not from the perspective he had back then, but from the perspective he has now. And perspective changes everything, because hindsight often reveals what pride once concealed. Now he sees your effort more clearly. Now he sees your patience more clearly. Now he sees your intentions more clearly. Now he sees your value more clearly, because distance has removed the emotional noise. And suddenly he realizes something. You weren't asking for too much. You weren't impossible to understand. You weren't impossible to love. You were simply asking for things he wasn't fully prepared to give. And that realization carries weight, especially because now he understands what those things were worth. There is another challenge he faces during this stage: comparison. And comparison becomes relentless. Every new conversation gets compared. Every new connection gets compared. Every new interaction gets compared. Not because he's trying to compare, because the mind naturally measures experiences against meaningful memories. Sometimes he notices people who are attractive, interesting, successful, funny. Yet something feels missing. Something doesn't connect. Something doesn't feel familiar. And eventually he realizes what that something is: the emotional connection he had with you. This realization can be frustrating because many people assume that moving forward automatically means moving on. But those are not always the same thing. Someone can continue living life while still carrying emotional attachment. Someone can move forward physically while emotionally looking backward. And that's often what happens here. The deeper his regret grows, the quieter he becomes, not because he cares less, because he cares more. When emotions become significant, people often become thoughtful, careful, reflective. They start considering consequences. They start considering possibilities. They start considering what they truly want. And now another thought begins appearing, one he has been avoiding, one he has been resisting, one he hoped would disappear. What if I lost her for good? That question changes everything, because until now there was always a possibility in his mind that you might return, that you might reach out, that things might somehow return to normal. But now that possibility feels uncertain. And uncertainty creates urgency. Not desperate urgency, emotional urgency. The realization that time is moving, life is moving, and you are moving too. He begins recognizing that your life did not stop when you let him go. You continued growing, healing, learning, building, living. And for the first time, he sees that clearly. Ironically, this often increases attraction, because confidence is attractive, peace is attractive, emotional strength is attractive. And there is something powerful about a woman who chooses peace instead of chasing. You are no longer trying to convince him. You are no longer trying to prove your worth. You are no longer fighting for attention. You simply accepted reality and continued living. And that energy speaks louder than words. Many men expect resistance. Arguments, emotional reactions, repeated attempts to reconnect. When none of those things happen, it creates a different kind of impact. A lasting impact, because your silence tells a story. Not a story of anger, a story of self-respect, a story of acceptance, a story of strength. And that story becomes impossible to ignore. Now the emotional weight becomes heavier, not because you changed, but because his understanding changed. He finally sees what was standing in front of him all along. He finally understands what he had. He finally recognizes what your presence added to his life. And unfortunately, understanding often arrives after distance. This is why regret feels so powerful. Regret is not simply sadness. Regret is clarity arriving late, and clarity has arrived. The heart that once whispered is now speaking loudly. The excuses are fading. The distractions are weaker. The memories are stronger. The emotions are deeper. He knows the truth now. He misses you. He values you. He understands your importance. And perhaps most importantly, he understands that letting you go may have been one of the biggest mistakes he ever made. But the story is not over, because once regret reaches its peak, something else begins. Action. Or at least the desire for action. The desire to reconnect. The desire to understand. The desire to see if a door remains open. And that leads to the final chapter. The chapter where some men return. Some remain silent forever. And some learn their lesson only after it's too late. In the next part, we shall talk about the return energy. Why some men come back after you let them go, why others stay silent despite their feelings, and the ultimate truth about why letting go is often the moment that reveals your true value. Now we arrive at the final chapter. The chapter most people wait for. The chapter that creates the biggest question. After all the silence, after all the memories, after all the realization, after all the regret, what happens next? Does he come back? Does he stay away? Does he ever tell you how he feels? The answer is not always simple, because every man responds differently. But one thing is certain. Once a man truly understands your value, he can never completely return to the version of himself that took you for granted. That version is gone, because awareness changes everything. By now, his heart and his mind are no longer fighting each other. The battle between ego and emotion has become impossible to ignore. The truth is standing directly in front of him. He misses you. He respects you. He values you. And he understands what your absence has taught him. The question now becomes, what will he do about it? This is where men usually separate into different paths. Some men reach out, some men hesitate, some men remain silent, and each path reveals something important. Let's begin with the men who reach out. These are often the men who finally accept their feelings, not because they suddenly became fearless, not because they suddenly became perfect, but because the fear of losing you becomes greater than the fear of vulnerability. For a long time, pride protected them. Pride said, stay silent. Don't admit anything. Don't risk rejection. But eventually, the emotional weight becomes too heavy, and the heart wins. Sometimes the message is simple. How have you been? Hope you're doing well. I was thinking about you. Nothing dramatic. Nothing movie-like. Just a small opening. A small attempt to reconnect. A small step toward something they once lost. What many people don't realize is that reaching out can be incredibly difficult, especially for someone who knows they made mistakes, especially for someone who understands they may not receive the response they hope for, but they do it anyway, because some connections become impossible to ignore. Then there are the men who hesitate. These men feel everything, the regret, the longing, the memories, the realization, all of it, yet they remain frozen, not because they don't care, because they care so much that fear takes over. Fear of rejection. Fear that you've moved on. Fear that it's too late. Fear that the bridge has already burned. Sometimes these men watch from a distance. They wonder. They think. They replay possibilities. They imagine conversations. Yet they never take action. And this creates one of life's hardest truths. Not everyone who misses you will return. Not everyone who loves you will reach out. Not everyone who regrets losing you will act on those feelings. Feelings and actions are not always the same thing, and understanding that can bring a lot of peace. Because someone's silence does not automatically mean you meant nothing. Sometimes silence simply means they lack the courage to face what they feel. Then there is the final group, the men who realize too late. These are often the men who spend too long believing they have more time, too long assuming another opportunity will appear, too long expecting life to pause. But life never pauses. People heal, people grow, people change, people move forward, and eventually they wake up one day and discover something painful. The woman they thought would always be there is truly gone. That realization can stay with someone for years, not because they are obsessed, not because they are trapped, but because certain lessons leave permanent marks, and losing someone valuable is one of those lessons. Now here is the truth most relationship videos never tell you. The purpose of letting him go was never to make him come back. Read that again. The purpose of letting him go was never to make him come back. If your goal is simply to trigger a reaction, then you're still emotionally attached to the outcome. You're still waiting, still watching, still hoping, still depending on his decision. Real letting go is different. Real letting go happens when you genuinely release control, when you stop trying to force understanding, when you stop trying to force appreciation, and you stop trying to force love. Because the reality is simple. You cannot make someone recognize your value. You cannot make someone appreciate your presence. You cannot make someone choose you. They must arrive at those conclusions themselves, and often, distance becomes the teacher. Distance teaches lessons that arguments never could. Distance teaches appreciation. Distance teaches perspective. Distance teaches clarity. Distance reveals what words failed to reveal. That is why so many men fall deepest for the woman who lets him go. Not because she played games, not because she manipulated emotions, not because she used some secret technique, because she stopped interfering with reality. She allowed him to experience life without her. She allowed him to feel the consequences of her absence. She allowed him to discover the truth on his own. And self-discovered truths are the most powerful truths of all. Nobody had to convince him. Nobody had to argue with him. Nobody had to explain your worth. Life explained it. Experience explained it. Absence explained it. Meanwhile, something important happened to you. Something even more important than whether he returned. You grew. You stopped measuring your value through someone else's attention. You stopped chasing validation. You stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given. And that transformation matters. Because your greatest power was never your ability to hold on. It was your ability to let go. Anyone can cling to something. Anyone can chase. Anyone can beg for understanding. But letting go with dignity, letting go with grace, letting go while still carrying love in your heart, that takes strength. And strength is unforgettable. Years from now, he may remember your smile. He may remember your conversations. He may remember your laughter. But what often stays with him most is the moment you stopped chasing. The moment you chose peace. The moment you accepted reality and walked forward. Because that was the moment he finally saw you clearly. Not as someone trying to hold on. Not as someone seeking approval. But as someone who knew her worth. And people never forget someone who truly knows their worth. So if you're listening to this today and you're struggling to let go, remember this. Your peace is not a loss. Your healing is not a loss. Your growth is not a loss. Your self-respect is not a loss. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding on tighter. Sometimes the greatest act of love is releasing what refuses to stay, and trusting that whatever is meant for you will find its way back. If he returns, you'll see him with clearer eyes. If he doesn't, you'll still be moving forward. Either way, you win, because your life was never meant to stop waiting for someone else's decision. And that is the final truth. Men often fall deepest for the woman who lets him go. But the woman who truly lets go discovers something even more valuable. She finds herself again.